Okay, so the first session that I want to look at today is what they call the GCP renovation. And I've said here it's about ICH E8 and E6. And those are the main two that are being updated at the moment. So ICH has done quite a large consultation on this. They have involved stakeholders from the industry, the regulators, investigational sites, so PIs, and also patient groups. So they have really tried to consult across the whole spectrum of people that are involved in clinical trials. Where we are up to at the moment is that ICH E8R1 has been published and is now final. So I'm just going to go over the kind of structure of that and the content of that and the key principles. And then E6 is also in the process of being revised. So that will be, when it comes out, it will be R3. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about where we're up to with that. And then, as I mentioned, I'm also going to talk about this M11. There is a lot on the ICH website, so you can always go to the website. There's lots of information. There's reports from the consultation meetings, articles, all sorts of stuff on there, but I will give you kind of a summary of where we're heading with it and what the implications are likely to be, and then we can have a chat about it. So E8, as I said, this is E8R1 is now final, and it's called General Considerations for Conduct of Clinical Trials, or clinical research, I think it says now. So it's really kind of an overarching document that looks at the process of developing the clinical trials to support the marketing application for a medicinal product. But one of the things that they are trying to do with this renovation is to broaden the scope beyond just what do you have to do to get a marketing authorization, which was the original focus of ICH. But this is more about clinical research generally, so kind of expanding it to post-market research as well. So what this document does is it talks about the objectives of the document, which are to support sponsor companies in developing clinical trial programs. It also goes over the general principles of the document, and there are, I'm sure you've heard this before, but just to kind of give you the framework, there are two key kind of buzz phrases and key concepts that have come in with this document, which are the sort of focus then for the renovation of E6 as well. The first one is what they call quality by design, or QBD. And this is really about looking at how you design your clinical trials to build quality into the whole process. And I think there's a big driver, and I've been talking about this at a lot of different meetings recently. There's a big driver to simplify protocols. And I made a joke last week at the conference, and again, everybody laughed. But it's not really a joke because it's not funny, because what we tend to do when we're designing a new clinical trial is, what our sponsors tend to do is they take the previous protocol, add a couple of endpoints, and then just run it again. And what that means is that protocols are getting more and more and more complicated, which is just, it's becoming unmanageable. So the regulators are really kind of trying to push for simplification of protocols. And so the quality by design, there are all kinds of elements to that. So, you know, having clear endpoints, thinking about your data sources, thinking about your patient population. There are specific things that they discuss about designing quality into clinical studies. But the focus is really on kind of going back to basics and saying, what's the question that we're asking? What information do we need to answer that question? And therefore, which patients do we need to include and which assessments do we need to do? Which is not rocket science, but I think we've kind of, let's just say maybe some sponsors have lost their way a little bit in all of this. So it's about quality by design, which is becoming a real buzzword in the industry. And then there is also the critical to quality factors. That's the other thing, which is where we're kind of looking at what are the things that are going to have the biggest impact on quality for this particular clinical trial, and what do we need to think about in terms of managing those. So chapter 3 is designing quality into clinical studies, which is the quality by design bit. And then drug development planning kind of takes those principles and puts them into developing a clinical trial development program. And then looking, so that's more about the kind of process of implementing a clinical trial program. And then chapter 5 with design elements and data sources, that's more about designing a specific clinical trial and thinking about, inclusion and exclusion criteria, the assessments that you're going to do, how you're going to do the stats on it, and also the data sources. So where is the information coming from? So, you could use a historical control, for example. A lot of advanced therapies don't have a specific control arm. They might use a historic control. So, where are you getting your data from? Where are you getting your information from for this particular study? Then chapter 6 is about conduct, safety, monitoring and reporting. So that's kind of an overview of those processes. And then obviously the detail of that will be in E6, because that's the GCP part really. And then chapter 7 is considerations in identifying critical to quality factors. So what they did in the draft version of this, if you saw it, they actually had an annex that listed all the potential critical to quality factors. They've taken that out now, and they just talk more about the process of identifying those critical to quality factors. And there are still kind of categories for those. But then I guess they wanted to get away from saying these are the only things that matter, but rather building a framework for how you identify those CTQ factors. And then the annex talks about types of clinical study. So it talks about the studies that we do in order to get a marketing authorization, but it also talks about post-marketing studies, so observational research, that kind of thing. But there's also a bit more, particularly I think when we get to E6, we'll see a bit more on the more kind of innovative designs, so adaptive trials, platform trials, basket trials, that kind of thing, which we see a lot obviously in oncology, but I think they're beginning to creep into other areas as well. So that's E8, which is out and is available. If you want to know more, I am doing a 1-hour webinar on that in April, I think, but it's on the website anyway. So if you want to have a proper, more in-depth session on it, then you can sign up for that. I'm afraid you have to pay for that one, but you'd be very, very welcome if you want to just focus on E8. Okay, so that's E8. And then E6 is what they've done so far is they've published the draft principles, and they're kind of changing the structure of the document. So the principles are going to form the kind of core of the document, the basis for the new version. And then they're going to have 2 annexes. This is what they're saying at the moment anyway. They're going to have 2 annexes. So Annex 1 will be on the traditional randomized controlled trials that we do in order to apply for marketing authorization. And then Annex 2 will look more at the non-traditional design, so the post-market trials, and also I'm guessing the more innovative designs as well, so adaptive basket, all of that kind of stuff. So they were saying that they hope to have the draft version out this year, but I'd be surprised if we see it, to be honest. We might, yeah, they said they were hoping to get the draft version out this year, but I think it might be next year. It's going to be at least a couple of years anyway before we get a new version of this. But it is on the way and they are working on it. So in terms of the draft principles document that they have put in place, there are a few key points that come out of that, which I think are just worth mentioning, and I'd be very surprised if these are not in the final version, because this is the way everything's going. So one of the things is that there was quite a lot of discussion about this in the consultation, about using the term participant rather than subject. There's still a lot of discussion around this when you look at kind of LinkedIn and places like that. People are still discussing what term to use for the people that actually are involved in taking the medication as part of a clinical trial. They want to get away from the term subject, because the idea is that this is not something we subject people to, and they are not kind of minions doing our bidding either. It's about partnering with patients or volunteers to run the clinical trials, and the fact that we need to be working more with patients. There's a lot of, about, as you can see on that third point there, that about participant involvement as well, and it's something that we're seeing talked about a lot in the industry. Interestingly, I'm not going to talk about the MHRA consultation at the moment, but MHRA are looking at putting this into the new legislation in the UK, which would make it a legal requirement to involve patients in clinical trial design, which would be an interesting step. But it's certainly something that all the regulators are wanting to see now. And also physician involvement as well. So involving PIs in, or potential PIs in clinical trial design as well. Quality by design and critical quality factors are also mentioned. Risk-based quality management, so that the whole risk assessment, risk-based approaches, that's not going away, that's definitely here to stay, and that will be in the new version as well. Use of technology and informed consent, so looking at e-consent and possibly remote consent as well, but making sure that that is used appropriately and that all the consent requirements are still complied with. Feasibility and simplicity, this is what I talked about earlier about the quality by design. There is a real push to say, simplify your protocols, make sure they're feasible, and cut down the number of endpoints, basically. There's also a statement in there about the responsibility of the sponsor and the investigator. So obviously ICH GCP has chapters on investigator responsibilities and sponsor responsibilities. And what this statement makes clear is that the sponsor and the investigator remain responsible for the clinical trial. So they delegate tasks, duties and functions, but they retain responsibility. So they're just really clarifying that very explicitly within the document. And then there's also a bit in there about supply and handling of IMP, and the key kind of development that I wanted to pull out of that is about using risk-based approaches for that. So if you've got a low-risk IMP, you might be able to provide it directly to the patient. You also might be able to use commercial supply rather than a specific clinical trial supply. So that was in there as well. Now, obviously, this is draft. Don't know what the final version is going to have in it, but these are the kind of main changes that I think are going to come in when we get to the final version. So I'd be surprised if any of those go away, but you never know. You never know. We'll see what happens when the final version comes out, but that's definitely the direction that we're heading in. And then the final thing I want to talk about, and this is as part of the GCP renovation, but it's not in the efficacy work stream, which is the clinical trials part of ICH. It's actually in the multidisciplinary work stream, the M work stream. So there is this document that is in the process of being developed, which is ICH M11, which is called C#, which stands for the Clinical Electronic Structured Harmonized Protocol. And it is a template for a protocol for a clinical trial. And it will be introducing standard headings and terminology. I knew nothing about this until a couple of weeks ago, and I suddenly found out about it and I thought, oh my goodness, I need to tell everybody about this. So if you haven't seen it before, this is coming. So I've got this screenshot from the ICH website about this. So this is where we're up to with it. Again, whether these timelines are met, I think we'll have to see, because I think these were kind of planned pre-COVID, so it may be that these timelines will slip. But what they're expecting to see for this document is this April, there will be a step one, which is the sign-off. So again, there's information about this on the ICH website. If you go to the M part of the ICH website, you can find all of this information. So they're hoping to have it as step one in April, and then step two in May, which is usually the first draft. So they are expecting the first draft of this document in May. There will then be a public consultation period, as there always is with the ICH documents. And the end of the consultation period is expected to be December. And then they'd be looking for step 3 and step 4 next May. Now, I think this will be quite helpful actually, and it'll be interesting to see what it looks like, and how well it is received. And I don't